You are live.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. This is our Friday edition, and we call it the Healing Circle. Now, for some reason, I see that my image is static and frozen, and I'm not sure, Dr. B, if you're hearing me or not. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
So I'm going to reach out to my colleagues because I'm using a mobile device to connect today. And from my side, I'm not connecting with the broadcast. So Dr. B, if you hear me, I'm going to pass the talking stick to you to introduce today's program and talk about what the Healing Circle is and our process with Sister Yolanda Lee of creating the Healing Circle as a strategy, a protocol for engaging our community. Dr. B, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, brother.
Okay, go ahead. I'm passing the stick to you.
I want to say welcome and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I see Brother Al McFarlane and Sister Yolanda Adams Lee is here, as well as Darlene Ramsey Riley. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the subject of child protective services and how our families are treated, especially in the middle of COVID, and some of the ways that we can promote healing in our community. So in our tradition, we have this healing circle, and the healing circle is, although we're not physically looking like a circle, we have to imagine being in an African space where we are celebrating our ancestors, and with the permission of our elders, we speak. And we have to acknowledge that we live and breathe and work and grow on the land of indigenous peoples that was not ours. We're growing on stolen land, and who were truth tellers and keepers of the spirit of Mother Earth and Father, Son, and the great spirit that created us all. We also recognize that our ancestors who came here through middle passages and on boats and ships and however they got here, stood and hoped and dreamed that we would be able to have voice and have power. So today, as we talk about being in a circle, the reason it's so important is because everyone in the circle has equal access to the center. And the center is the space of power. So all voices in this space are welcomed, appreciated, and valued. And whether you're young or old or wherever you come from, you have a space here in this healing circle. And I'd like to just pass the talking stick to my sister and co-creator of this idea, Sister Yolanda Adams Lee. Here's the stick, sister.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. It is my always humble honor to be in the presence of such greatness. And so I thank you, and I join with you to invite those that look and feel and experience like us as being wounded healers and wounded survivors. And so the opportunity today, one of the things that we do, as is our tradition as a part of the Healing Circle, is to also invite and share with our audience and those who have ingratiated us with their presence today, that we want to share with you a couple of things as we start to take the journey together. One of those is that if you are triggered, if you start to experience any kind of symptoms from the conversation that we are about to embark upon today, a couple of things that we'd like to invite you to do as far as taking care of yourself. Number one, know that we got you. You're not alone. And as you are in this space, if you start to experience any symptom, shortness of breath, tightness in chest, tightness in your neck area, breathing starts to become rapid, headaches, sweat, your palms become sweaty, or you start to you feel perspiration in your brow or anywhere, one of the things that we would first of all like to invite you to do is to look to ground yourself. And then what we mean by that is have your feet flat on the floor, sitting erect. Look to your right. Look to your left. Look behind you. Identify your exits, your windows, your doors. It is very important to understand that in space, whatever you hear, you have a way out, an escape out. You are safe. And so we want you to know that we got you. And at any time, as we transition to the end of the program, if you need to further process, we want you to contribute to the part of the circle if you are impacted around the conversation we are getting ready to embark on. The conversation that we embark on that Dr. B so eloquently introduced is child protection and COVID, because remember, this is what we're talking about. Our collaborative is about being empowered, not being imprisoned to COVID. We are not victims, we are victorious. And although COVID may have had some semblance to that middle passage experience, which it has, because we've been isolated and we've had some losses. We want to talk about our most vulnerable part of our village, and that are our parents and our children who have, for whatever reason, have entered into a system called Child Protective Services. And we know that the largest number of children in out-of-home placement and parents involved in this system, if you will, happen to be people of color, African American and Native American. We just talked about, Dr. B just introduced some things around that, about our trauma. And so that intergenerational trauma of entering into that system does trigger the DNA within us. We know in Minnesota that in January 2021, the interim commissioner, Miss Nikki Fargo, noted that we had a sharp drop in cases that were reported by 22%. And so we want to talk about what that looks like. That's a congratulatory experience if we knew that those families were safe living in and with COVID. And so one of the warriors that has done this work for so many years, Miss Darlene Ramsey Riley, who works on the front lines, both now and historically, I wanted to ask her to join our circle and give us some feedback around how has families survived, and what are the things that you have observed, experienced with families that, let's say, have had, that are involved in child protection and with their children. So we know that symptomatically we've heard things like parents weren't able to have visits with their children. Children weren't able to see their parents. Children and parents both who may have been impacted or infected by COVID, people didn't have any information about the well-being of that person. And that in of itself adds another layer of trauma and fear. So I'm hoping that you can talk to us about a little bit, and we see we have another sister that's joined us, Miss Brenda Lyle Gray. Welcome.
Thank you.
Darlene, can you just talk a little bit about what I just sort of launched here, and how was that for families and children?
It was
I'll
quite
pass the stick to you. the talking stick.
Thank you. It was pretty traumatic. In-person visits were canceled for foster children. And also some of them were done via Zoom, but some of the visits were just canceled. So then you had these kids that wanted to see their parents, the parents that wanted to see their kids, but they could not do so because of the state regulations that they changed in-person visits to Zoom visits. So that caused a big problem with some of the emotional health of some of the children that we had in care. One of the main things that I saw was some of these children are babies. So it's hard to do a Zoom visit with babies.
When you say baby, sister, are you speaking of infants?
Yep, infants, 2 and under. Really 4 and under. It's hard to do a Zoom visit with parents with little kids this small because they don't understand that they're supposed to be talking into a camera. They don't understand the concept of Zoom. So instead, they run around, and they still don't get the contact that they need with their parents.
Okay. And what agency are you working with at this time, Miss Riley?
I am a supervisor for Family Alternatives.
Okay. What are some of the other dynamics? So we have children who are having to look at a television, if you will, right? And they have already, now we're talking about children who are in out-of-home placement, including relatives.
So yes, children in out-of-home placements. Our agency is a licensed foster care agency. We license and supervise foster homes. So the kids that I'm speaking of are kids that have been removed from the home and they're in a foster home at this time.
Okay. And so prior to COVID, children had what types of, let's just say, reactions to being in an out-of-home placement? And then could you go a little further and share how COVID impacted those symptoms or those reactions to being away from mom and dad or being away from their caregiver?
Okay, so first off, out-of-home placements are a traumatic experience for every youth that endures it. To go into the home and remove a kid from their home is traumatic. It causes quite a bit of trauma that on top of that, they then have to worry about, where's my parents, which is what's normally thought about. But now they have to worry about, okay, we got this pandemic and some people's parents are dying. Am I going to see my parent again? What's going to happen? So that fear kind of sets in with some of these older kids on what if something happens to my mom or dad? When am I going to see them again? Maybe if I was home, I could take care of them if they got sick. So you have all this stuff going through because they're just kids. They don't understand. But they can't see them every day, so they don't know. And now you've cut off my visits. So I really can't touch them. I can't hug them, and they can't hug me. Some of them have thoughts that, what if I get sick and die? Is somebody going to tell my mom? Is my mom and dad going to know where I am? So I think one of the big things that I've noticed was the fear setting in. The fear of the unknown, and that sets in with foster care. But I think with COVID, it expanded even more because it was so many people dying, so many people getting sick, so many people hospitalized that it affected kids tremendously in foster care.
Okay, I'd like to take a pause and invite and offer our sister that has joined us, Ms. Brenda Lau Gray, and have her to introduce herself and and join. I'll pass you our stick and ask you to join us.
Thank you, Yolanda. I'm busy taking notes and listening. And hello, Dr. B. I've missed seeing you. But I am a columnist and with Insight News, and enjoying writing and meeting such wonderful, dynamic people. This has been a good week, Al McFarlane. It really has. We met some
Right.
dynamic young men who are taking the lead of leadership in Minneapolis, and I was just thrilled to meet them. Reminds me of our revolutionary days in Kansas City. So it's been a good week, and so I'm looking forward to hearing more information. I hadn't thought about that angle of the children, and we've talked about trauma, but boy, this is another level of trauma.
Mhm.
So
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking forward to hearing more.
So some of the reports, I'm going to shift just a moment. Some of the reports that I've personally observed and encountered that were quite concerning to me, Darlene, and Dr. B can chime in as well, is that we had parents that, let's say, had a case plan, because if allegations are made against a family, then the county or those in authority to say, this is what you need. This is the kind of corrective action that needs to occur for us to either return your children to you or for us to get out of your business. And so one of the things that was quite concerning to me and others in the community is that we had parents that perhaps were in treatment, right? So they were receiving maybe some chemical dependency treatment. And so as we were all learning, and those in authority in the health profession were learning how to navigate this, folks were already tested, and they're in treatment, they're going about their business. Someone new comes in the door who perhaps tests positive, and everything shuts down. So now I can't go see my babies on my visit. I don't know if I have it or if I've passed it on. Can you talk about how that impacted from what you've observed? We've talked about the children, but let's add this other component. How was that with COVID, and what services did we hear that were offered in our community? Because what we heard was we were probably the least likely to get vaccines and get tests, and we're isolated, and folks who've ever been maybe incarcerated are now being triggered because it's like, oh, you got me in solitary confinement, another trigger, another layer of trauma that has not been healed. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
And I'll pass you back the talking stick.
Thank you. I would say that I have watched several parents just give up on doing their case plan due to all of this, the stipulations that are the regulations with COVID, because they've been shut down several times. If I'm speaking of one particular family that I'm recalling, first the wife ended up with someone with COVID on her job. They had to stop work. They had to stop work, and they had to stop visits.
Mm-hmm.
Then I want to say about 3 weeks later, the husband ended up with COVID. They had to stop work. They had to stop visits. All of their stuff ceased. So at this point, they're up for a pre-trial for termination.
Can you say what that means, termination?
So termination of parental rights.
What does that mean?
So that means that normally once they come up for termination of parental rights, it's normally that they're not doing their case plan. So the parents, for some reason, Child Protection is saying that they're not complying, they're not completing their case plan, and then they're taking them to trial to terminate their parental rights.
So I'm
Let
going
me
to
jump
ask.
in a minute, Yolanda, because just before she gets to this next piece, I want to just emphasize what that means for the parents and
Yes,
what that means psychologically for the children.
yes,
Because the younger the children are, and I want our audience to understand that the younger a child is, the more deleterious or harmful it is to be physically separated from their parents. Because we have attachments that occur early on in infancy through toddlerhood that children actually have to physically feel the heartbeat of their parent, physically feel and hear the voice of their parents to create the neural pathways of familiarity that let them learn what is a safe space from what is not. And if those voices of the mom, the dad, the family, the grandma, if those voices aren't imprinted, and if that physical touch is not provided, that leads to all types of attachment disorders. Where we have one that is called, the most severe form is called disorganized attachments, where children don't even know right from wrong, up or down, who from whom. Their care is chaotic. They don't know who's gonna come when they cry. So it creates a lifelong trajectory of mental illness likelihood and challenges. We have one called anxious attachments, where children they hold anxiety. We say that about 30 or 40% of children who live in poverty don't know when the next meal is going to come from, so they have anxious attachments. And these babies, when they don't have a solid, consistent exposure to a caregiver, especially their parents, they are easily farmed off to other people to whom they don't really belong. That is why we have a lot of white people trying to get black babies, because it's easy to attach to a baby. Now, let's take it a little further. As they get older and older, these children have relationships with their parents. And they actually know what mama does. They know what daddy does. They know what my brothers and sisters do. They understand their space in that family. Sometimes a child may inadvertently say something like, I got a whooping at school. And because we're in an integrated school districts, and we have people who are not culturally adept, who are not aware or understand even the cultural meaning of what a whooping is. There's not a beating or a beat down. We got various levels of what that means in our community. And so when they hear it, their alarm goes up. And when my sister Yolanda was talking about a 22% drop, my first belief is that we're not engaged in these white systems that don't understand us and that report us. Most of the child protection reports come from schools. That's how they get in these systems. And so if we're not dealing with those schools, we're not going to be sending kids to child protection. But the problem is sometimes our kids need to go. But those of us in families and in our community, we know Sister Shanae and Pookie them are smoking crack. Why are you letting the baby stay over there? And you know they smoking crack. What is our responsibility in terms of keeping them out? But once they get in, it ought to be critically important that we create ways for kinship to make those visits. If your mama can't come, can't your grandma come? She's not in a group home. So I don't see people breaking their necks to do that piece. And I couldn't hold back. I just had to say it because I want us to just lay the playing make it a level playing ground field, so that we know all the facts that we're dealing with as we approach this subject. And we know that foster care is not anywhere near what our children need. They need to be loved. They need permanency. They need stability and reliability. And I appreciate you, sister, for talking about what you have witnessed. So you have borne witness to the impact, not just to the babies, but to the parents and to that critical period relationship that they need in their lives to be well. So I couldn't help it. Sorry for breaking in because there was a good flow, but I needed to stir this pot up a little bit so we can get up in there.
So
really
Dr. B, this is thank you for that. And I want to take I want to take a pause because now is a time because I'm feeling triggered. So I want to be thoughtful about how our community might be feeling right now. This stirred up some stuff in me. And so here's a time that we will want to. Here's what the circle does. Let's come alongside one another. Let's get our feet grounded. Let's take inhale. Exhale. That's gonna slow down your breathing and your heart rate. And if you're feeling some anxiety, which I was experiencing some anxiety in my heart as this information was shared, because it's there, it's stirring up some fear, some anxiety, some
Anger,
some abandonment, some rejection. Turn to your right. Turn to your left. Look behind you. Identify your exit. It's very important right now. This process, here's what I want you to hear. If you are in our audience and this has occurred to you, we got you. You're not broken. You're not defective. You are having an experience and a journey, and we're with you as your community. This is about all of us. And when it occurs, as Dr. King says, to one of us, it's injustice to all of us. These are our babies, our babies. So I just want you to understand what the circle, the healing does as we connect together. I want you to understand that we are carrying this with you. Thank you for sharing that component, Dr. B, because again, we want to be balanced in what we're saying here.
That's right.
And we know that our historic trauma goes back to that inner passage that Dr. B has talked about, being brought to this country against our will, held in captivity against our will, sometimes beaten and sold off, away from our children, away from our wives, our husbands experiencing other men raping their wives and children. This is historic trauma. And so when we move forward, we know now, right, that by geneticists and research, and it is medically sound and found, what I've believed my whole professional life, that that trauma becomes a part of our DNA. And so we might experience something that we don't even know why we're triggered. But maybe Big Mama Nim, 3 generations ago, our great grandmother, who was on a plantation or in that inner passage or was in a boarding school. Come on. Then we experience something and we have a reaction. And then folks misunderstand. And maybe we don't even understand why we're responding that way. And so as we have this conversation, these are the things that we're talking about, why our children may be asymptomatic. Maybe our children are having some responses when they say, oh, well, they got ADHD. Oh, well, they're, emotionally, dysregulated. Well, let me ask this rhetorical question, and I'm going to pass the stick back to Miss Darlene. When a child, what are some of the things that that we hear or you hear around children when out of home placement, or even if they're still living in the home with the parent, and the school is reporting that the child is dysregulated, they can't leave, they can't learn, they are defiant, they're running. Can you share some of those experiences and what that might look like, or be, or what are the contributions to that behavior? Because we know that nothing happens, right? When a baby cries, they're telling us something. When a child behaves, they're telling us something. When an adult behaves, they're telling us something. Ms. Darlene?
So what I've noticed is that the first thing that they do is they decide that they want to do an assessment. A lot of times they want to do an assessment for alcohol fetal syndrome. They want to figure out if there's some kind of chemicals that's been used with these children. Another thing that I noticed that they do, they try to explore, you know, my experience is with foster homes, so they don't do it as much with foster homes, but I also have experience working in the special ed department for Osseo School District. And what I noticed is that they first look at the parents. Well, what's going on at home? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? Who lives in your home? What happens at night? You know, so it's always exploring the things about the family, the judgmental stuff about the family, before they actually really understand that it could be culturally, or it can be just the trauma of your neighborhood. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and now that I look back on it, I understand my trauma, because I walked across beer bottles, liquor bottles. If I walked past the liquor store, everybody in the liquor store or all the bums out on the street was, hey, hey. And I knew, even at the age of 14, that if I didn't speak back, it was going to be some problems. So that in itself is traumatic. You know, you watch the drug. I was in Chicago during the crack era, when crack first hit the streets. And, you know, what they don't understand is what about these kids' community, or what is that could be affecting their response to things. Just because you don't understand it don't mean they don't understand. You know, they don't have this going on. You know, if Johnny is running all the time, Johnny might be running because he got to run home from school, you know, because this is going on or that is going on. And mom said, get home as soon as possible so you don't get caught in it. You know, they don't understand the culture side of it and the trauma that kids might have faced, you know, that actually affects their behaviors in schools. First thing they want to do is assess them, put them on medication, and basically put them in special ed, you know, give them an IEP. So that's just some of my thoughts about schools. Normally when they're in a foster home, about 80% of my kids are already on IEPs. Very few of them, once they get to the foster home, we're actually assessing them. There's some kids that are younger that stay in the foster home for a long period of time. They often get assessed. And there's some kids that have come in younger, been adopted because they're looking for permanency right away.
And so what about the COVID component? How has COVID either contributed and or been impaired, families been impaired about receiving services, let's say? And, you know, we know that poverty, oppression, right? Lack of housing ravages our community, right? And so we know that in particular, we have had those who have been thoughtful and made it and regulated free lunches and free breakfasts for our children. What about those children that are now not getting those services because of COVID?
Mhm.
Well, in foster homes, their foster parents are expected to provide no matter what.
Mhm.
But I think the part of it that strikes me is that the social part for foster children. They're not
Mhm.
getting that social interaction. A lot of time that school is the one place that's still consistent in their lives because they never take the kids out of their school. Well, most of the time they don't take the kids out of their school. So that social piece was missing, that piece where their friends were, especially kids that could have been taken out during COVID. So then their parents are separated from them. Their teacher is separated from them. They may see her on Zoom, for distant learning, but all of that was taken away from these kids, you know. And I do have one case that was the case that happened with them, that were removed during in the middle of COVID, and everything was wiped away from these kids. They were traumatized. I was at that foster home, I want to say in a 5-week period, I had case noted at least 20 visits where back and forth, where the kids wouldn't stop crying. They wouldn't stop crying. I had to go back. One of the kids ran off the porch and ran down the street. I had to go back. These kids were traumatized. They had never been in an out-of-home placement, and they were just dropped somewhere that they didn't know. You
That's
know,
right.
you know.
Sister Darlene, I want to ask you another question.
Mhm.
As long as you're holding the talking stick, this would be a great time to educate us about something else. In my practice, I often have seen that because foster care parents would take kids to counseling, or you go to their house and do home visit for counseling for the kids. But I'd often hear people say that during that time that they were in foster care, and after they saw their parents, mother or dad or both, that when they came back to the foster home, they were dysregulated. And often the child protection worker would say, that's why they need to be in out of home placement. Going home dysregulates them. I have my own hypothesis, but I'm just wondering, what did you see? Did you see that happening with kids who would go and meet with their parents and then come back dysregulated?
Yeah, 90% of the kids go on visits and they come back dysregulated. But I don't think it has anything to do with they shouldn't be at home. It has more to do with the trauma of them being removed. Kids don't care how abusive or neglectful or whatever those parents are. They want to be at home, and to be away from that person that they have formed their attachment to, no matter if it was good or bad, is still traumatizing to them. So it's always going to cause triggers when they go back to them and they have to leave. So no, I disagree with that. I don't think that it means that kids shouldn't go home. I think it means that this situation with out of home placement is extremely affecting their emotional and physical health.
Thank you. I thought you might say that. I agree with you.
And
Let me
so
let me bring something up, if you would. I'll ask for the talking stick.
Here, I'm handing it to you.
Thank you.
Go
I'm
ahead,
taking it. I want to thank everybody for this wonderful conversation, this informative and passionate examination of the issues and the challenges. And I wanted to bring another dimension. I think it's I'm almost envisioning this as a three-legged stool, because Sister Darlene has talked about the process of foster care, and then Dr. B has talked about that in the context of historicity, of historic trauma, and you have as well, Yolanda. And I wanted to add one more piece into this, and I'm adding this from my perspective as a journalist and a communicator, as an observer, and as a witness. And I can tell you that over the past 24 years or more, our community has often rallied to question the process of out-of-home placement and the practice of moving Black children out of Black homes. You referred to this a little bit, Dr. B, and into white homes. And the premise behind that at one level is that white homes are normal and that Black homes by nature are insufficient. And that anytime you can move a Black body from a Black environment, a Black child from a Black family's home, and the excuse is often something that's real in terms of a dangerous situation or a situation that triggers the observation and the engagement of the child protection system, well intended, but beneath that good intention is a practice and a belief that we haven't tested. And the belief is that just get the Black person out of the Black environment and put him in a white environment, and he or she automatically will be better and have more opportunity and become fulfilled as a human being. That the message around that is that being Black in and of itself is, what's the right word for it? A bad thing.
Being inferior.
Almost inferiority.
Yes.
So then the skeptic in me and the journalist in me makes this observation that it's what I'm looking at is consistent with this principle of white people getting money for Black misery. We get the misery, they get the money. Now, the point I'm making is that it is appropriate for society to create, allocate, and deploy resources from the general treasury for the general good of all of the population. And when and where there is dysfunction, danger, problems that need attention, they should be addressed from the public treasury. That is good. But what happens when the premise behind it is that no good can come from the Black community and that the only good that is reliable and therefore fundable is that which is cloaked in white culture, white skin, white supremacist thought, and that also, by definition, stands against what we say we are, who we say we are as human beings who are African, who are Black. So I want to throw that out there. Principal, shortly, questions. What is the business behind moving Black children out of Black communities and into white communities? And particularly because you raised the question, Dr. B, what about other members in the family available and willing, and can they be resourced like we resourced white people to take care of Black people? And particularly, Yolanda, because I know your heritage includes the Native American community, the horrific experiences of mass programmed removal, the destruction of indigenous people's homes and lives under the premise that their lives and homes had no meaning and no value, and that in the spirit of the missionary intent, those children would be better off raised white and stripped of their identity. So what about all that? How does it all play into right now?
Sounds like, what I'm hearing you say is colonization. It's the continued colonization of the primary, most vulnerable peoples continue to be the same. Native American, African Americans born in this country of slaves. That is the continued colonization. And there are similarities, as we know. So as we talk about Black families, Black children being in white homes, what does that remind us of? And so therein is my point around that genetic DNA that's getting triggered inside of us. Even if we are not experiencing it personally, our vicarious trauma is being triggered because we're seeing it. We are asking that same question. Who's benefiting from our misery continuously? That is a collective question that we, quite frankly, I have not, and I would venture to say you have not, because you asked the question, and we're living it. We're living proof of what we're talking about. So when we talk about having to be able to identify exits, to be able that I know that I by choice can leave when I feel trapped. That's connecting to a part of my trauma, my intergeneration, my historic trauma, and my current trauma. And then we add COVID onto that. It to me looks like a 21st century colonization of our communities. And I'll defer to you, Dr. B, with the stick as to giving your view on that question.
I wholeheartedly agree about the colonization component. And I also agree that part of the utility of taking Native and Indigenous babies and putting them in boarding schools was the savior syndrome, taking them from the negative, inferior location of their tribes and desavagizing them. That's my own word. Getting rid of the savagery in them by making them whiter. And that same analogy fits for Black children, and because we were also deemed to be less than human. We were savages. And so all of that really was controlling our bodies. That's why when I think about COVID, and I think about the fact that we can't breathe, and I think about the fact that we are a community in need of resuscitation, and that resuscitation comes from recognizing that we can control our bodies. It comes from recognizing that when you can control your body, you can leave, you can choose to escape, you can find your route out, and that you can be safe again. And so when I think about babies in these systems, I see that trauma is being projected onto the babies. So now they're in institutions that they cannot escape. They can't breathe. They can't say, I want to be with my mom and be there. They can't control who has them, who cares for them, who doesn't. They can't control where they go to school or what they eat. They can't control it. So it's a transgenerational perpetuation of an already pre-existing historical traumatic condition. And the only way out is for us, one, to recognize it and call it what it is. Call it what it is. Then after we call it what it is, we have to use our own kuumba, our own creativity as people of color, people of indigenous roots, people of the first creation. We are those who have made ways out of no way, and that ingenuity and that creativity and that resilience in us, we have to figure out ways of making it work. So that's what comes from this for me, is this discussion when I listen to my beautiful sister over here, Darlene, who's working every day and seeing the pain firsthand. I don't see it every day. Well, I see it every day, but not by the same people, because they come to my clinic. I see them all week. And I can tell you right now, it's the painful story of not being able to choose, and the reluctance of the systems, oftentimes, of not seeking kinship care. Not they're all, her grandma's too old, she can't take her. Or all the aunt, she does have a PhD, but she lives in Chicago, she can't take her. And so whatever it is in the system, they don't break their necks trying to connect them with someone like them. They see the correct answer is to find somebody outside of that system. And when we do get Black and brown bodies who want to adopt or foster children, if they are not carefully managed into the foster care system, they too will join the white oppressor in their belief structure in terms of how they are supposed to engage their own brothers and sisters from their community. So to me, as we think about centering, on the healing power within us, the healing power that has brought us here. I think we have to seek solutions that maintain our cultural cohesion and give us the power that we were rightfully and divinely born with. That's my answer to that question.
Darlene, I'd like to wrap it up with one more question in specific, that so that folks know that we're still, that's a part of our gift, that's a part of our creativity, is that we're still talking about children and child protection during COVID. And I would be, derelict if I didn't talk about vaccines and our experience with vaccines and being medicated out of that colonization, and some of the fear in our that is rightful. Scott Joplin, to name one. And so when we talk about those things and for children and those that are vulnerable, what have you seen as far as access to vaccinations, access to services for children, and the overall, I would say, response to being vaccinated or getting access to vaccinations for foster children and or those who are providers such as yourself?
So our team is probably 100% vaccinated. I think we've all been vaccinated, but we're not a very big team either. We're a staff of about 15 people. The one thing that I have found, most of the foster parents have gotten vaccinated. But the one thing I found, something funny, it's funny that you say this because I had a foster parent and him and his wife are older, and he goes, well, he's going to have to move if he doesn't get vaccinated. And he's against it. And he's a teenager. And I said, well, let's talk about it. So I started to say, so who are you worried about him infected if you get COVID? Because you've been vaccinated, your wife been vaccinated. And then he goes, well, I have a 9-year-old granddaughter. Okay, I said, so let's pull up the statistics on how COVID affects 9-year-olds. And then he goes, okay, and it was really funny to me because this kid, this foster parent, he had the roughest 18-year-old ever before this kid. And he was talking about getting rid of them due to a vaccination because of a 9-year-old. But yet, this kid was a perfect 16-year-old that wasn't doing anything. So I said, did you weigh your odds? He's like, no, he don't have to be vaccinated if he don't want to. So it was funny.
Where was his fear, sis? Was his fear into this tasteless, invisible, very, very real virus? Or was it, I mean, when you weigh the child, we're talking about still an adolescent, right? Mm-hmm. That is vulnerable, that has made a choice. And I love the fact that you were giving him education. That's what our collaborative is about. It's not just about, advocating, but it's about educating and advocating and teaching people how to apply what we're learning and overall, right? Wholeness. Mm-hmm. So what was that? What part of that dialogue did you find he was fearful of?
I think it was just his demand that if it was available to him, he wanted him to take it because he's living in his house. But I think what I turned it around to is to make him really think about, is this really that serious? Is it really that serious that this 16-year-old that's been perfect has to go because he's against taking the vaccine? Is that the stance you want to make? And to get him to come up with his own ideas, basically, and break it down, it was a good thing. He goes, Oh, forget what I just said. He doesn't have to move, by the time he figured it out.
So
So
how can we, what do children and adolescents and even foster parents that maybe have some reservations about the vaccine, have some reservations about the process, what can we do to support that, those concerns, those needs? How can we, as part of our collaborative and our community, how can we put our arms around those children and those families and walk alongside them, to help them to get what they need? What would you say the greatest need around COVID and children in out of home placements, foster parents? What is the greatest need there?
the greatest need, I would say, would be to educate, get an understanding, educate, and give them what they need to make their own choices about what's best for them. I have my views on it, but with all things, I think the best thing that we could do is just educate, just give them the information and let them come up with their own understanding. Now, if it's my own 12-year-old and I said we're taking the vaccine, then we're taking the vaccine. But we can't say that with foster children, so we have to give them a choice. And if they choose not to do it, then that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did I answer your question? Okay.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sister.
Okay. As a former educator, 37 years, how do we get this into professional development? How do we get to the teachers, to the administration about some of these issues that you have discussed? And by the way, I just took my second shot this morning at 9:30. So I'm fully vaccinated, boss. So, but I'm really curious. I just think when these kids come back to school in the fall, the teachers are going to have to be so equipped with so many things, and we have so many layers to break through. So I'm just curious, is there some type of plan with the commissioner of education or whatever in Minnesota to work professional development? And because we've got a lot of white teachers that are teaching Black kids, and they don't have a clue what these, and they're not, I mean, even kids that are not in foster care are going to be coming in August and September with, I mean, they don't know what's going to happen from day to day. So I was just curious, how do we get to the teachers, and especially to the white teachers, to understand what these kids are going through and the families?
Well, we have to leave that as a question to think about because we're out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're absolutely out of time. This has been a wonderful, wonderful program, a great conversation, a great subject. And I want to thank everybody. And Darlene, thank you especially for the work that you're doing, the leadership that you bring to community, and for the clarity that you bring to all of us, enabling us to focus on critical issues. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Dr. B. Thank you, Brenda Lyle. This has been a great conversation. We're here every Friday. Now, you might be checking us out on YouTube. If you do, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on Facebook, like us, share the conversation. You may be checking this out through the Facebook page of the Black Press USA, the Facebook page of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. However you've come, we want you to be a part of this, help us grow and expand the audience, build the connection that we're creating here, and tell your friends, be here with us. We're here every day at 1 o'clock, but this program every Friday at 1. Thank you all, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sister Gray.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.